It started as a simple plan, a road trip meant to be a break from the routine, a chance to reconnect with old friends and take in the open road. I was excited, maybe even a little too eager to escape the monotony of everyday life. Before I go deeper into the story, welcome, and make sure to subscribe to the channel, Echoes of Nightmares, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss out on any of the future scary tales. If you're enjoying this story, hit that like button too. Also, leave a comment to let me know where you're listening from in the world. Now, back to my story. The weather forecast warned of heavy rain, but none of us cared. A little rain wasn't going to stop us from making the most of the weekend. Besides, we had the music, the snacks, and the kind of banter you only share with people who truly know you. By the time we left the last gas station, the rain had started. The sky felt closer somehow, like it was weighing down on us. I remember thinking the road ahead looked almost alive, slick with rain and shining under the headlights. We joked about it, about how creepy it was driving through what felt like the middle of nowhere. But the truth is, I wasn't laughing. There was something about that stretch of highway, something that didn't sit right with me. It wasn't just the rain. It wasn't just the way the trees leaned in over the road like they were trying to shut us in. It was something else, a silence underneath the noise, a stillness that made me grip the steering wheel just a little tighter. My friends didn't seem to notice. They were busy arguing over the playlist, teasing each other, filling the car with laughter. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we shouldn't be there, that we'd made a mistake turning onto that road. And then I saw it. At first, I thought it was just my eyes playing tricks on me, rain smearing across the windshield, making shapes out of nothing. But the longer I stared, the harder it became to explain away. Something or someone was standing at the edge of the road, barely visible in the headlights. I slowed down, instinctively, but as soon as I blinked it was gone. Gone like it had never been there at all. I didn't say anything. Maybe I didn't want to sound paranoid. Or maybe I didn't want to believe what I thought I'd just seen. But I should have said something. I should have turned back right then and there. Because as we drove deeper into the rain, into that endless stretch of highway, I realized we weren't alone. The idea for the road trip had come up months earlier. It was Jason's idea. He was always the one with big plans, the kind of guy who hated sitting still. Emily and I just went along with it, happy for the excuse to break away from work, from responsibilities. The three of us hadn't seen each other in years, and the wedding felt like the perfect reason to reunite. Jason drove down from Chicago, picked up Emily in Indianapolis, and met me in Louisville. From there, it was supposed to be a straight shot to the tiny town where the wedding was being held. But time got away from us. We'd left later than we planned, and by the time we hit the road, the sun was already setting. Jason suggested taking a shortcut, a back road he'd found on a map that would supposedly shave off an hour. It sounded fine at first, was one little detour, but when we stopped at a gas station to fill up before taking the turn, things started to feel off. The gas station itself was run down, more of a relic than a functioning business. Inside, it smelled like mildew and stale coffee. A man stood behind the counter, old and grizzled, with deep-set eyes that didn't blink nearly enough. Jason, ever the charmer, asked about the shortcut while I browsed the shelves for snacks. The man froze for a moment, like the question had caught him off guard. Then he shook his head and muttered something about sticking to the main road. Jason laughed it off, but I noticed the way Emily hesitated, glancing between the map and the man. "Why not?" she asked, her voice light but unsure. The man didn't answer directly. Instead, he just said, "You'll save time, but it's not worth it." Then he turned and disappeared into the back room, leaving the three of us standing there, unsure of what to say. I didn't think much of it at the time. People can be weird, right? Maybe he just didn't like strangers. Or maybe he was trying to mess with us. Jason, of course, shrugged it off entirely, and within minutes, we were back on the road, turning onto that narrow, unmarked highway. The first thing I noticed was the silence. Not in the car, Jason and Emily were still chatting away, but outside. There were no other cars, no distant lights, no signs of life. Just us and the rain. And then, the radio cut out. Jason smacked the dashboard and twisted the knob. Nothing. Just dead air. Emily joked that we were officially in a horror movie, and we all laughed. But beneath the laughter, I felt it again. That same unease I'd had back at the gas station. The road seemed to stretch endlessly ahead, each mile looking exactly like the one before. Trees pressed in on both sides, their branches heavy with rain. Every so often, Jason would swerve slightly to avoid a pothole, cursing under his breath. But it wasn't until we passed the first road sign that things started to feel wrong. It was just a simple wooden sign, tilted slightly in the mud. It read, "Turn back." I laughed nervously, assuming it was some kind of prank, but Emily frowned. "That's creepy," she said, leaning forward to get a better look. Jason waved it off, saying it was probably left over from some construction crew. But as we drove on, the feeling in the car changed. The laughter stopped, the conversation died down, and the rain only seemed to get heavier. It was Emily who noticed the second sign, a mile or two later. This one was metal, rusted around the edges. The letters were barely visible, but I could still make them out. No return. Jason laughed, but it sounded forced. "Okay, this is getting ridiculous," he muttered, speeding up slightly. I stared out the window, watching the rain streak across the glass. In the distance, I thought I saw movement, a flicker of something between the trees. But before I could focus, it was gone. None of us said it out loud, but we were all thinking the same thing. Something wasn't right. The road felt wrong. Too empty, too quiet, like we'd left the rest of the world behind. Emily kept glancing over her shoulder, and even Jason seemed more focused, his usual confidence fading. I wanted to tell him to turn around, to find another way, but something stopped me. Maybe it was pride, or maybe it was the way the trees seemed to close in tighter the further we went. Either way, by the time we realized we were truly alone, it was too late to go back. We'd been on the road for about 30 minutes by then. 30 minutes of rain hammering the windshield, of Jason muttering about the potholes, and of Emily sitting quietly, clutching her phone like it was some kind of lifeline. The GPS had been fine at first, showing us a straight route ahead. But then, without warning, it glitched. It wasn't a normal glitch either, not the kind where the screen freezes or the route recalibrates. This was different. The map flickered, the image twisting and warping, and then it reset completely. I leaned over from the passenger seat to get a better look. It was showing us as turning in circles. The little blue arrow spun again and again, no matter how straight Jason drove. "This thing's a piece of junk," Jason said, smacking the screen with the heel of his hand. But it didn't fix it. If anything, the spinning got faster. Emily tried using her phone, pulling up a map app, but hers wasn't working either. It just showed a blank grid, the kind you get when you're completely out of range. "No signal," she said quietly, her voice barely audible over the sound of the rain. That was the first time I felt it, a cold draft brushing against my face. It was strange because the windows were up and the heat was on, but it wasn't just cold. It felt sharp, like a needle pricking at my skin. I glanced at Jason, wondering if he felt it too, but he was focused on the road, his jaw clenched. Emily pulled her jacket tighter around herself, shivering. I opened my mouth to ask if she was okay, but before I could, something else caught my attention. It was in the rearview mirror. At first, it was just a blur, a dark smudge that didn't match the rain or the trees. I thought maybe it was the reflection of something inside the car, but the more I stared, the clearer it became. It was a shape, a person, standing in the middle of the road behind us. Their face was turned down, hidden beneath a hood or maybe just shadows, but I could see their outline, still and unmoving, even as the rain poured down around them. I blinked, thinking maybe it was just my imagination. But when I looked again, they were still there, standing perfectly still, not moving an inch. I turned to say something to Jason, to tell him to stop the car, but when he slowed down and I looked back, they were gone. Just like that, like they'd never been there at all. Jason noticed me staring. "What?" he asked, glancing at the rearview mirror himself. "You see something?" I shook my head, but I could tell he didn't believe me. Emily didn't say anything either, but I caught the way she kept glancing over her shoulder, her fingers gripping her phone like she was waiting for it to do something, anything. We kept driving. The road was getting worse. Potholes turning into deep grooves that rattled the car with every bump. The rain didn't let up, but the sound of it began to change. It wasn't just pattering against the roof anymore. It was muffled somehow, as if the world outside the car was sinking underwater. Even Jason noticed it. "Is it just me, or is it quieter?" he asked, his voice cutting through the silence. None of us answered. And then we saw it, the sign. At first, it was just a blur through the rain, a dark shape looming on the side of the road. But as we got closer, the words came into focus. White letters, faded but still legible. "Turn back now." It was the same message as the first sign, but this one felt different. Older, more deliberate. Jason slowed the car as we passed it, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "That's just someone messing with us," he said, his voice louder than it needed to be. "People love doing stuff like this." But none of us responded. Emily was staring at the sign as we drove past, her eyes wide. I turned to look out the rear window, half expecting to see the figure again. But the road was empty. At least it looked empty. We should have turned around right then. It wasn't too late. We could have gone back the way we came, found another route, or even waited for the rain to stop. But we didn't. Jason kept driving, the tires splashing through puddles, the headlights carving a path through the darkness. And as the minutes ticked by, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were driving straight into something we didn't understand. The rain grew heavier, the road more treacherous, and somewhere deep in my chest, I knew we were no longer alone. We had been driving for what felt like hours, but the GPS still wasn't working, and the road seemed endless. Jason had stopped cracking jokes. Emily was staring out the window in silence, and I kept glancing at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that figure again. The rain showed no sign of letting up, and every so often, the sound of it would shift, soft one moment, deafening the next, like it was trying to drown out something we weren't supposed to hear. Then, out of nowhere, Emily spoke up. "Did you hear that?" she asked, her voice trembling. Jason shook his head, his eyes glued to the road. "Hear what?" he asked. Emily hesitated, her face pale. I don't know, it sounded like someone whispering. In the rain, her words hung in the air, and for a moment, none of us said anything. I wanted to tell her it was just her imagination, that the rain and wind could play tricks on your ears. But then I heard it too. It wasn't clear, it never was, but it was there. A faint, murmuring voice, just barely audible beneath the rain. I turned to Jason, waiting for him to say something, but his grip on the wheel only tightened. "It's nothing," he muttered. "Just the wind." But I could tell he didn't believe that. None of us did. We kept driving, the whispers fading in and out. And then we saw it, the car. It was sitting on the side of the road, its hazard lights blinking weakly. At first I didn't think much of it. A broken down car in the middle of nowhere wasn't exactly unusual. But as we got closer, I realized something was off. I'd seen that car before. Same make, same color, same dent on the rear bumper. It was the same car we'd passed 20 minutes earlier. Jason slowed down, his eyes narrowing as he glanced at the car. "Is it just me, or?" he began, but Emily cut him off. "It's the same car," she said, her voice firm. Jason laughed nervously, but it was forced. "No, it's not. It just looks like it." But I could see the doubt in his eyes. We kept driving, and 20 minutes later, we passed it again. This time, None of us said a word. The same hazard lights, the same dent, the same puddle forming beneath the tires. It didn't make sense. We hadn't turned, hadn't doubled back, and yet the car was there, waiting for us. Jason pressed the gas harder, the engine groaning as we sped down the road. But the whispers grew louder, and the rain seemed to press against the windows like it wanted to get in. And then the car stalled. Just like that, the engine sputtered and died, and we were left sitting in the middle of the road, surrounded by nothing but trees and rain. Jason cursed under his breath, turning the key again and again, but the car wouldn't start. Emily shifted in her seat, her breathing shallow. "What now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jason didn't answer. Neither did I. The rain felt louder now, like it was closing in around us. I glanced out the window, and that's when I saw them, the footprints, muddy and uneven. They led from the trees straight to the car. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. "Jason," I said quietly, trying to keep my voice steady. He didn't look up, still fidgeting with the key. "What?" he snapped. I pointed to the window, my hand trembling. "Look." Jason turned to look, his face pale. "What the?" he muttered, his voice trailing off. Emily leaned forward, her eyes wide. "Are those?" she started, but she didn't finish the sentence. None of us wanted to say it. None of us wanted to admit that someone or something was out there. And then Emily opened the glove compartment. I don't know why she did it. Maybe she was looking for a flashlight, or maybe she just needed to do something to keep from panicking. But when she opened it, there was a note. A crumpled piece of paper that hadn't been there before. Jason grabbed it, his hands shaking slightly as he unfolded it. 3 words were scrawled across the page in smeared black ink. "It's watching." Jason threw the note onto the dashboard, his face a mix of anger and fear. "This is ridiculous," he said, his voice rising. "Someone's messing with us." But Emily shook her head. "How? There's no one else out here." And then we saw it, a figure stepping out of the woods, its outline barely visible through the rain. It moved slowly, deliberately, heading straight for the car. Jason froze, his hand still on the key. Emily's breathing quickened, her eyes locked on the figure. I didn't move. I couldn't. The figure stopped just short of the headlights, its face hidden in shadow. And then it took another step forward. None of us wanted to be the first to move. The figure stood just beyond the reach of the headlights, its body blurred by the downpour. Jason tightened his grip on the door handle. "We can't stay here," he whispered. Emily shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. "What if it's waiting for us to step outside?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the rain. But Jason wasn't listening. He pushed the door open with a sudden burst of determination. The sound of the rain grew deafening as the door swung wide. "Run!" he shouted, and without thinking, we followed him. We ran as fast as we could, the rain soaking us to the bone. The ground beneath us was slick with mud, and every step felt heavier than the last. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but I couldn't stop. Behind us, the whispers had returned, louder now, almost taunting. I risked a glance over my shoulder and immediately wished I hadn't. The figure was moving, but it wasn't running. It was gliding, its movements unnaturally smooth, like it didn't belong in our world. "This way," Jason shouted, leading us down a narrow path that cut through the trees. The branches clawed at our arms and faces as we pushed forward, the rain blinding us with every step. And then we saw it, the car, our car, sitting in the middle of the road, just as we'd left it, the hazard lights still blinking. "No," Emily whispered, shaking her head violently. "No, no, no. This isn't possible." Jason grabbed her arm, his face pale and drenched. "Keep moving," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "We'll find another way." But I knew he didn't believe that. None of us did. We were trapped, caught in some kind of endless loop, and the whispers were getting closer. And then Emily screamed. I turned just in time to see her stumble, her hand reaching out toward Jason. But before he could grab her, she was gone. Just gone. No sound, no struggle, just empty space where she'd been standing. Her phone hit the ground, its screen cracked but still recording. Jason froze, staring at the spot where she'd disappeared. "Emily," he shouted, his voice cracking. I grabbed his arm, shaking him hard. "We have to go," I yelled, but he wouldn't move. He just kept staring, his lips trembling. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to acknowledge it. But I did. Her voice, Emily's voice, calling from the woods. "Help me," she said, her tone calm, almost serene. "I'm over here." Jason turned toward the sound, his face lighting up with hope. "She's alive," he shouted, and before I could stop him, he was running into the trees. "Jason, no!" I screamed, but it was too late. The woods swallowed him whole, the sound of his footsteps fading into the distance. I stood there, alone, the rain pounding against me, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. And then I heard it, his scream, piercing, terrified, and abruptly cut off. I backed away, my heart racing. My only thought was to get back to the car, to lock myself inside and wait for the rain to stop. But as I turned, I saw it, the figure. It was no longer blurred by the rain, no longer a distant shadow. It was standing just feet away, its eyes glowing red like embers in the darkness. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. It raised a hand, long and clawed, and pointed at me. And then the rain stopped, just like that. No transition, no warning. One moment it was pouring, the next silence. The world around me was still, except for the whispers. They didn't come from outside anymore. They were inside my head, loud and deafening, repeating the same phrase over and over. "It's your turn." I don't know how I made it back to the car. My legs felt like lead, my body trembling with exhaustion and fear. The headlights were still on, casting long, eerie shadows across the road. The rain had stopped, but the air was thick with an unnatural silence. I climbed into the driver's seat, fumbling with the keys, my hands slick with mud and sweat. The engine sputtered, refusing to start. I hit the steering wheel in frustration, my eyes darting to the woods, expecting to see the glowing red eyes at any moment. And then, through the windshield, I saw it, a faint, flickering light in the distance. It wasn't a car. It was a cabin. Jason was still out there somewhere. Emily too, or so I told myself. I couldn't leave them. I grabbed the flashlight from the glove compartment and stepped out of the car, the cold air biting at my skin. The path to the cabin was overgrown and uneven, branches clawing at my clothes as I stumbled forward. The light grew brighter as I approached, but it flickered erratically, as if struggling to stay alive. When I reached the cabin, the door was ajar, creaking softly in the breeze. Inside, the air was damp and heavy, the smell of mildew overpowering. The flickering light came from an old oil lamp sitting on a rickety table in the corner. The walls were lined with photographs, pinned haphazardly, their edges curling with age. I moved closer, my breath catching in my throat as I scanned the faces staring back at me. Travelers, families, groups of friends, some smiling, some caught mid-laughter, but all of them gone. And then I saw it, our photo, taken earlier that day at the gas station. Emily was smiling, Jason had his arm around her, and I was staring at the camera, oblivious to the shadowy figure standing behind us. My knees buckled, and I grabbed the edge of the table to steady myself. That's when I noticed the writing, a single word scrawled beneath our photo. Next, the door slammed shut behind me, the sound echoing through the cabin. I spun around, my flashlight flickering as I aimed it at the door. It was empty, but the whispers, The whispers were inside now, circling me, filling my head with their taunting words. I stumbled back, knocking over the lamp. The room plunged into darkness, and then I felt it. A presence, cold, unyielding, right behind me. I turned, raising the flashlight, and there it was. I screamed, but no sound came out. The last thing I remember was the cold, clawed hand reaching for me, pulling me into the darkness. And then nothing, just silence, just rain. They never found Jason, or Emily, or me. The car was discovered days later, abandoned on the side of the road, the hazard lights still blinking. They say the highway is cursed, that those who take it never make it to their destination. But I know the truth. It's not the road. It's not the rain. It's something else. Something that watches and waits. And when you see the light, it's already too late. You'd think after everything that happened, the road would stay empty, that no one would dare take the shortcut again. But there's always someone who thinks the warnings don't apply to them. Someone who thinks they'll be the exception. They'll find out soon enough. The road doesn't care who you are. It doesn't care why you're there. Once you're on it, the only thing that matters is whether you'll make it back. And most don't. What would you do in this situation? Would you have turned back? Or would curiosity have gotten the better of you? Let me know in the comments below. If this story sent chills down your spine, give it a like and share it with someone who loves a good scare. And don't forget to subscribe for more spine-tingling tales like this one. Until next time, stay safe and stay off the shortcuts.